Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Coffee with Matt. Glad you're here with me this morning at least here in Northern Illinois, a very unseasonably warm weekend. Forecast is close to 80 degrees for today, and I think about the same for tomorrow. So uh, just an amazing forecast here. So that kind of brought up a few things. I've had a handful of questions this week from customers about the warm weather and, just a handful of other garden related questions. So I kind of thought we would do just a little sort of potpourri today of garden advice or maybe just timely garden advice. So I've got a list of things here. Some of them are just questions that people have asked me this week. Other are just a few things that are on my mind that I thought I could give you a little bit of advice and tips on, hopefully help you avoid some issues in the future. So we're just going to jump in. First thing that was top of mind for me today, and not just because it's so warm this weekend, is watering. So the soil is getting very dry. We were very much blessed. You've heard me talk about this throughout the summer months. Really blessed with pretty adequate rainfall and pretty consistent rainfall throughout the year. Towards the end of September, and then basically most of or all of October, we've been pretty dry. We had one, I wouldn't even say significant rain event, but a nice rain event about 2 weeks ago, maybe 10, 12 days ago, something like that, where we got about 6/10 of an inch of rain. That's all we've gotten in October. So even though plants are entering dormancy, some are already dormant, some are entering dormancy, some plants are still kind of alive and well right now. They are going to need some water, and it's always a good idea that plants, regardless of species, that they go into winter with some good ground moisture. So my first recommendation is get out the hoses. If you've already put your hoses away or disconnected them, get them back out. It's really important. It's probably the single best thing you can do to get your plants ready for winter and give them a leg up next spring. This is a time of year when the root system on trees, shrubs, etc., are going to be growing and expanding. The warm soils of the fall and the lack of top growth is one of the, it doesn't necessarily encourage root growth, but it's just a good time of year for root growth. But if the ground is rock hard, that root system is going to have a lot harder time expanding. So get the hoses out. If you've got well-established trees, I like to use like a big oscillating sprinkler and let it run for a couple of hours. You can put a rain gauge out there. You can put a tuna can or something. If you do a tuna can, that's about an inch of water. So when the can fills up, you know that you've basically gotten an inch of rain on that general area. If you're using a rain gauge, obviously it's going to have measurements on there for you. So ideally, get an inch of water down underneath the canopy of those big, older, established trees. If you've got younger or newer trees, I just like to put the hose right at the base of the tree, put it on a little faster than a trickle, and let it go on a brand new tree. I'd say 30 to 40 minutes. If it's maybe a couple of years in the ground, it's getting established, but it's not really well established, I'd say maybe more like an hour and 15. It's better to give a tree a lot of water at one time and then let it dry out for a week than it is to water it every day or every other day in small amounts. So that deep soaking is what's going to help hydrate the entire root system, and it more closely mimics what would happen if we were to get a really good soaking rain where that water makes its way down deep. The ground will dry, the ground surface will dry out faster, and the lower areas will remain with some moisture, and so the root system can kind of, sort of continue to grow in that, as well as suck water and nutrients out from the lower areas versus the upper areas, that type of thing. So that being said, I've also seen online about the fall needle shed on evergreens and how that might be caused by dryness. That's not caused by dryness, so I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. So fall needle shed, we get a lot of questions about that at this time of year. Fall needle shed is when the interior needles on your white pine, on your arborvitae, hemlocks and spruce will do it, but the ones that are really noticeable are going to be your white pines and your arborvitae. So in white pines, the center of the tree typically will turn yellow, and you'll start seeing needles falling out of the tree. In the case of arborvitae, like the Techni and some of those types, you're going to see sort of a yellowy orange interior needle. On the green giant arborvitae, which I have a handful of at home, you're going to see kind of a more orange, kind of orangey red almost, or orangey brown interior needles. That is totally normal for them to be doing that. They're dropping needles to replace or to make room basically for next year's spring growth. So if you imagine a branch on an evergreen tree, if it had leaves, needles here and here and here and here and here, and every year it got more needles, that branch would become so heavy that it would just break under the weight of all of that foliage. So what happens, depending upon the species, is it's going to drop either its 2, 3, or 4-year-old needles to make room for next year's spring growth. Whereas, say, a maple tree, obviously it gets all of its leaves in the spring, it drops all of its leaves in the fall, and it starts over every year. Evergreens don't do that. They're going to keep a percentage of their needles, but they're going to shed some out. So totally normal process, not water related. That being said, evergreens definitely will benefit from a good soaking right now, and even going into November. They definitely will benefit from a really good soaking so that they can go into winter well hydrated. Let's talk about planting. I'm not really sure where the myth came from originally or where it originates from, but I get a lot of people who will call, stop in, ask, text, whatever. Is it too late to plant? Or when I make a recommendation for something, they say, does that have to wait till spring? Is it too late? That type of thing. There's really technically no such thing as too late to plant. I mean, I would say in the case of your smaller perennial plants, the longer you go into the season, the less likelihood that they'll be able to root in. And in really small plants, they may actually heave out of the ground during the wintertime. So if you're going to do perennials, grasses, things like that, I'd get them in the ground. Make sure you've got some good soil around them, some good loose soil, and then just kind of pack that in good around them, and make sure you have a nice layer of mulch over the top. In the case of trees and shrubs, you have the better part of a month to really month and a half. I mean, we're always able to plant all the way through November. We're usually able to plant for the first week or two in December. So as long as the ground is not frozen, it's safe to be planting. Trees, shrubs, all of that. There's very few exceptions to that. So I would encourage you to get out and plant if you can. You get a leg up on the springtime, especially if you're doing things like lilac, forsythia, magnolia, redbuds, all of those kind of plants that bloom so early in the spring. It's a lot more enjoyable to get that tree in the ground or shrub in the ground right now when it's going to be 75 and sunny, and give it a chance to establish, rather than trying to get it in the ground in the spring when it may be cold and wet and rainy and the ground is all mucky and stuff like that. So I really like the soil conditions and the weather conditions for fall planting. Plants tend to really like it as well. Not that this is necessarily about the sales and stuff, but we do have a clearance sale going on that just started on Thursday. So all of our trees and all of our shrubs that are in the garden center are at least 50% off right now. So that's a good bonus. All of our perennials, vines, and grasses are 75% off, as are our ornamental crabapples. So a lot of good deals to be had, plenty of good inventory. So that's that. Let's talk animals. Had a customer yesterday with some fairly significant deer damage on a maple tree. I've got people asking about vole damage and things like that. So I thought I would just talk a little bit about animal repellent and just other ways of keeping the animals at bay. So specifically deer and rabbits, if you have problems with them chewing on plants in the fall or in the winter time when food becomes scarce, I would recommend Plant Skid. It's an organic rabbit and deer repellent. The liquid seems to work really well for winter damage. You spray it directly on the plant. You spray it right on the stems of the plant. So if they're chewing on the branches of your, viburnum or lilac or whatever it might be, you spray it right on the branches. One of the things that I always remind people is if you've got a 3-foot tall, let's say viburnum shrub, you probably need to spray the entire 3 feet of branches, because when we get some snow, that rabbit on its hind legs is going to be able to reach up a lot higher. So, I would say you're going to spray from the ground level up to 3.5 feet, something like that, for rabbit damage, and you probably want to be in the 2 to 4 foot range for deer, because they tend to kind of bend over and munch. So they'll reach up a little bit, although not that high. Maybe down here somewhere. So I can tell you at home we have an old hedge of Techni arborvitae. They were there when we bought the house, and every one of them the deer have trimmed. It's like just probably armpit height on me. And it's, we could limbo underneath those. They have completely cleared every bit of foliage out from that height down. Now, some of the other arborvitae, like Green Giant, that happens to be deer resistant, so they don't bother it at all. So if you have deer issues, that might be a good one for you. If you're, if you're having vole issues, then the granular version of this plant skid tends to work really well, and you want to get that down in the late fall before the snow starts falling. Sprinkle it around the foundations of the house. Sprinkle it along the beds. If you had seen vole damage throughout this year, you kind of see those little trails that they leave, or maybe it was after last winter and you know that they're still around, so you can sprinkle the plant skid in that area. So that should help a bit. The other thing I wanted to mention is in terms of deer damage on trees. This is the time of year when 2 things are happening, although we're kind of getting towards the end of it. But deer in September and October, or late September and through October, the male deer have velvet on their antlers, and they want to get that velvet off to expose the antlers. And so what they'll do is they'll reach their antlers inside the trunk of a tree and kind of rub and scrape to try to get that to peel off. It's almost like a layer of skin, and so they're going to be doing that. That is very damaging to the tree, and sometimes you will see marks along the trunk from that. But even more devastating to the tree is when the male bucks, when the male deer, the bucks, when they start scraping the trunk of the tree to kind of mark their territory and sort of assert their dominance in the area, they will absolutely tear up the trunk of a tree. This is a really good method for protection. This is specifically designed for trees. It's a corrugated tube. It looks a lot like drain tile. However, you have probably noticed that this is white. Most of the time drain tile is black. It comes with a slit already in it. It's about 4 inches in diameter, so you can go up to a 4.5 inch diameter tree trunk at least. And it's white, so it reflects the sunlight rather than absorbing it. That's important because black tubing or black wrapping, things like that, oftentimes will get too warm during the winter time, and it'll cause the water or sap underneath the bark to sort of heat up. So it can cause, although it'll prevent animal damage, it may cause some frost cracking issues, or at least not prevent it. The white corrugated tree guards here actually do a really good job of reflecting the sun, so it helps protect against frost cracking and deer and or rabbit damage. So you can use these on trees. It can be cut if you need a shorter piece, so these work really well. And definitely now is the time to get those on because we've seen quite a bit of deer damage just in the last week. So, generally this is kind of breeding season, mating season for the deer. So this is the time of year when you'd want to get that on if you're, if you know that you either A, have had issues in the past, or B, are just in an area where you're seeing a lot of deer activity. All right, let's talk a little bit about grass seed. Been getting a lot of people coming in asking about grass seed. We've talked a fair amount on this program about grass seeding, but this is actually the time of year when I tell people don't do any grass seeding. So, August and September, awesome time for grass seed. The first week or so of October, still probably pretty good for putting down grass seed. Now we're in that period of time where we've got some really nice warm weather right now, but we all know what's going to happen, end of October, or even, I guess, probably next week. The bottom's going to drop out. It's going to get a lot colder. And what you don't want to happen is you don't want the grass seed to germinate. So you spread your grass seed out, you start watering it, it germinates, it starts forming little roots, you start to see some little green tops. And then you get a really cold night. Maybe it goes down into the low 20s or something. Well, those little tiny, freshly germinated grass seedlings are not going to tolerate that, and they're just going to wither up and die. And the roots are not deep enough, and they're going to just wither up and die, and so it will basically be fruitless. So you have a couple of options. Of course, you can wait until next spring, but one thing I like to do is what is called a dormant seeding. So dormant seeding means you wait until after this kind of intermediate period here, and you wait until the lawn is truly dormant or going dormant. So I typically would say like early to mid-November. You can put grass seed down. You can even put it down, in late November. Ideally, like, when the ground is a little bit softer and or right before we're going to get some rain or snow. It actually works really well. Get that grass seed down, and then the rain or snow will push that seed kind of a little bit into the soil. You don't really want to plant grass seed, but just kind of pushing it into the soil a little bit, that natural moisture will do that. The seed will lay dormant, and then in the springtime, when the ground starts to warm up and the sun starts to shine on the ground, it will start to sprout. Usually works really well. If you have large areas that you're doing, I for sure would put an erosion blanket or some seeding straw, which we have here, over the top. That'll A, help hold it in place, B, keep the birds off of it, and C, if you've got pets or whatever, they can still walk across that straw blanket or the seeding straw without getting their paws super muddy and that kind of thing. So it's kind of multi-purpose there. So that's a little bit about grass seeding. I get a lot of questions about trimming. I see a lot of people out cutting down their perennials and their shrubs and all that kind of stuff. I've talked a little bit about that in the past on here. I would first, before I just kind of went hog wild in the yard doing trimming, I would go out and look for like diseased perennial plants. So if you had some issues with your hostas this year, if you had powdery mildew on your peonies, if you had leaf miner on some plant, things like that, those are kind of the ones that I would say go ahead and trim those back, get rid of this year's foliage, and clean that area of the garden out. That's the single best way to prevent a reoccurrence or reinfection of whatever may be plaguing that particular plant. However, if you've got good, healthy plants, ornamental grasses, prairie dropseed, our prairie dropseed right out front of the office here is just looking absolutely magnificent right now. It's kind of got a nice yellowy orange cast to it. The seed heads are beautiful. The birds are darting in there, grabbing some seed here and there. That kind of thing, I would just recommend that you leave that up. It's good forage for the birds. There are certain insects that will overwinter on that, on a lot of our garden plants. So leaving those out for the birds, for the insects, things like that is really a good idea. And then you can get rid of that material in the springtime after insects start to hatch and the birds have had their feed and that type of thing. So leaving up seed heads, flower pods, things like that is usually a really good idea. Same with leaves. I know you have to get them off the lawn because they may kill your lawn, but consider chewing them up with either the lawnmower or get a leaf vac that has a chopping system in it of some kind, and you can put that leaf material right back in any of your beds. Leaf mulch is a wonderful soil amendment. It's a wonderful mulch. It's great for adding to compost piles. So really good product, and we do sell it in bags, but you can make your own. You have leaves in your yard, they're falling. So, mow them up a couple times and then, rake up what's left or put them in that leaf vac system, chew them up, and that works really well. So as far as trimming goes, you also would want to avoid trimming anything that blooms very early in the springtime. Most specifically lilacs, magnolias, fragrant viburnum, things like that. Pruning those now will cut off their flower buds for next year. But if you need to trim, most of your larger shrubs, like privet, larger viburnum, things like that, now would be fine. During the winter is fine. If you need to limb up a tree, we're just about at that time of year. I'd probably wait about another 2 weeks, but that'll be a good time of year to raise the canopy up on your trees. If you've noticed that the branches are kind of hanging down low and you're kind of bonking your head as you walk past it, or you're on the lawnmower or whatever, this would be a good time of year, maybe another 2 weeks or so when the tree fully goes dormant. The reason I like to wait for dormancy is that there's less likelihood of attracting disease or insect to that fresh wound. It gives it a chance to callus over before the disease or insect, presents itself, basically. So there's less fungal spores and bacterial spores and things like that in the air at that time of year when it gets that cold. So that's a little bit about trimming. This is a good time of year to do some dividing, especially on some of your hardier plant material. Hostas, daylilies, allium, things like that. This would be a really good time of year to dig those up and divide them. If you've got really sensitive plant material, I don't know, lavender, what else? Coreopsis, things like that. Some of the, especially some of the finer, like fine-leaf coreopsis, things like that might be a little more tender. I'd probably wait until spring on those, but I would say the vast majority of perennials you can do at this time of year, especially if you've got a nice, big, healthy, established clump. We just did some dividing here at the garden center. We just did a kind of a little re-landscape project on the north side of our office building and out near Route 64. We redid some of our display beds out there, just trying to update with some newer varieties of plants that we've been carrying and just kind of give it a fresh look. But part of that included digging up and dividing we had some well-established clumps of Amsonia, which is a really pretty plant with blue flowers in the springtime, kind of late spring. We dug up some allium, we dug up some calamintha, which calamint or calamintha is a little kind of white or very pale purple flowering perennial plant, great for the pollinators. But we had some nice established clumps of that. We kind of moved some of those around, divided a little bit of it. We divided and moved a few ornamental grasses that we had out there as well, and then added a lot of new plant material. We just did that last week, and we spent this week watering everything in really good, and I'm really excited to see how that turns out in the spring. So that's a little bit about dividing. Fertilizing. I get a lot of questions at this time of year. Is it time to fertilize your plants? Yes, I love fall fertilization. Especially if you're putting down like something like plant tone or holly tone, so any of your organic type fertilizers, those are really good to go down at this time of year, basically all of October and November. They're really not going to do a lot right now, but they'll slowly break down into the soil, and there's bacteria on those that will kind of basically digest some of that stuff, make it available for the plant a little bit this fall, but more specifically in the spring. As the plant starts to wake up, those nutrients are going to be available to the plant. So I really like fall fertilization. Spring and fall is ideal. If you can fertilize twice a year, that's great. If you're only going to do one time of year, I would do fall. The plant tone and holly tone lines of fertilizers, like I said, are organic. I just cut the corner off the bag. It's organic, so I just reach my hand in there. It doesn't smell great. Maybe you want to wear some gloves, but I just kind of throw it throughout. If I've got larger beds, I just sort of throw it throughout the bed. If I've got specific plants, there's actually a little chart on there, and you can measure, this plant based on its size requires 2 cups or, that type of thing. But otherwise, in larger beds, I'll just kind of scatter it throughout, almost like I'm feeding the chickens, that type of thing. So that works quite well. Bulbs. We're right at that time of year where it's great to be planting bulbs. It's probably a little warm this weekend, but not bad. They're not going to sprout overnight or anything. So the flower bulbs, daffodils, tulips, crocus, hyacinth, all of that kind of stuff, the snowdrops, etc. All of those are great to plant right now. Believe me, it is well worth your time to get some of that stuff in the ground right now. It is such a joy in the springtime when you see those flower bulbs popping up, when there's not a lot blooming, not a lot happening, and you get that bright punch of color from those orange or red or yellow tulips and the yellow and white daffodils and all, like, just, they're so pretty. Some of them are fragrant. It's just such a joy in the springtime. They're very inexpensive. A bag of 10 bulbs is about $6 or $7. So you're getting, each plant is 60 or 75 cents on the high side. And if you buy a big bulk bag that we have, they're even less. Some of them are 30 or 40 cents a bulb. So much less expensive in the bigger bags, but you don't have to go crazy. What I like to do with them, I've seen people, they kind of drill holes randomly and put a bulb in each hole, that type of thing. I don't really love the way that looks. What I like to do is dig a small hole. I'm going to say roughly the size, maybe a little smaller than a dinner plate. And, depending upon the type of bulb, you're going to go down 4 inches, maybe 6 on the high side. And what I like to do is set the bulbs in the ground. I'm just going to kind of draw it out real quick. I mean, this is really good artwork right here. But I just like to dig that hole and then just kind of place 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever it is bulbs in the hole, kind of space them out. And what that does is that gives you just this really nice clump in the springtime. Rather than one tulip with one tulip flower on there, or maybe 2, you end up with this nice little, kind of sort of bouquet of flowers right there. Really a nice look, very easy to do. So I would consider doing that right now. Also, if you're looking to try to get amaryllis to bloom for the holidays, now is a good time to plant those. We've got some gorgeous varieties of very large, like extra large amaryllis bulbs. You're probably going to get 3 to 4 flower stems out of each one. I mean, these are big premium jumbo-sized amaryllis bulbs in reds and whites and pinks and bicolors. Very cool plants. I just potted one up yesterday, so that I will have something blooming in, probably early December. My guess is it'll be blooming maybe by Christmas time, or maybe at Christmas time. So that's a really fun thing to do too. What else? Anti-desiccant. That might be a term you're unfamiliar with. So desiccate means to dry out or lose moisture. Anti-desiccant, of course, means to try to preserve that moisture. I brought up one product here. We have 2. We have Wilt Stop and Wilt Proof. Wilt Stop is a little sort of lower concentration. This is really good for cut greenery, wreaths, roping, even Christmas trees, things like that. Spray it before you bring it in the house, or spray it before you hang it up. It's going to help keep those needles green much longer. It's going to help prevent them from drying out. Wilt Stop or Wilt Proof applied to landscape plants is also a really effective method of preventing winter burn. So I've used it for years on things like boxwood and rhododendron and holly. So your broadleafed evergreens, it works really well on those. It works very well on soft needled evergreens like cypress, like false cypress, even some of the like arborvitae, things like that. So you can use it on just about anything. It's a natural product. It's made from pinene, which is basically something that they extract out of pine sap. So it's natural, and it just kind of creates a waxy coating on the surface of the leaf, almost like when our lips get chapped and we put like Vaseline or chapstick or something like that on there. It's kind of that same sort of concept where our skin needs just a little protection from the drying winter winds, and that's exactly what pinene, Wilt Stop and Wilt Proof, that's exactly what they do. It also works fairly well on plants whose stems tend to dry out during the wintertime. So specifically, that would be like roses. Sometimes the canes tend to dry out over the wintertime, so you can spray the rose canes after the leaves all fall off. You can spray the rose canes with this. One thing that I have never tried, and I'd love to hear if any of you have tried it, but I was doing a little bit of reading, and I've seen some folks having some good success with spraying anti-desiccants like Wilt Stop and Wilt Proof on hydrangea stems that tend to dry out. And so I was thinking that that would work really well on the Macrophylla hydrangeas. Those are the big blue and pink ones that everybody loves. The buds form really nicely in the fall, but then by the time May rolls around, the stems or buds have dried out, and so you get all this new growth from the ground, and they tend not to bloom very well when that happens. So if you can preserve some of this year's stems for next year, you have a much, much higher likelihood of having those flowers bloom. So I have never actually tried that. The concept makes perfect sense to me. I've just never tried it. So certainly worth a shot. It's not very expensive, and so maybe give that a whirl if you're having trouble with those, endless summer, bloomstruck, all of those, all of the tough stuff, tiny tough stuff, any of those types of hydrangeas, that's Serrata and Macrophylla, those would work really well. That would work, or it should work really well for helping. So I also like to put a little bit of a chicken wire cage or some type of cage around those plants and fill it with leaves. That also helps to insulate them during the winter time, kind of give them a little bit of a winter blanket. The last thing I had on my list was, I just kind of wrote on there, was houseplants. And if you brought houseplants in, this would be a really good time of year to check them for insect activity. So, I don't know, it was about 3 weeks ago, we were starting to get some fairly cold nights. And, even on this program, I was saying, hey, it's probably time to bring the tropical plants in the house. I was doing that at home, or a lot of people were dragging them into the garage and then, put them back outside. Well, we've got a nice warm weekend, obviously, on tap. So inspect your plants. If you didn't get a chance to inspect them or spray them well before you brought them in, it'd be a really good idea to check them, because now they've been in the house for about 3 weeks. So you've got a very controlled environment. Controlled environments are typically when insect activity is allowed to flourish, because now you have no wind, you have no rain to knock the insects off, you have no or very few predatory insects, spiders and praying mantis and ladybugs and all of those kind of things, and you have no birds that are going to be flying in and out and kind of picking insects off of plants, that type of thing. So in that controlled environment of the house, a lot of times insect outbreaks will kind of explode. So this is things like mealy bugs and white flies and scale and all sorts of stuff. So if you did have any of that stuff, or if you're seeing any of that stuff, this would be a perfect weekend to get that plant, bring it outside, spray it really good. We have a couple of different types of spray that would work. Depending upon the type of insect activity, you can always bring a sample into us. Or text some photos, or ask some questions, what would be best to spray for X, Y, or Z. But the nice thing is that you can leave that plant outside tonight. It's actually only going down to, I think the forecast for our area was like 61 tonight. So basically any tropical plant would tolerate that just fine. So you can bring it out today, spray it really good, let it stay out overnight. Shouldn't have any issues with that. And then you can bring it back in after everything has dried, and hopefully that insect activity has been taken care of at that point. So it's also a good time of year, if you need to give those house plants one last really good thorough soaking. Get them outside, hose them down if you didn't get a chance to do that. Soak the root systems, let them go into winter with a little moisture. And then when we truly do get into winter, pretty much all houseplants, you want to dial your watering back. So even though they're tropical plants, even though they're in the house, they will be using less water during the winter months. So in the winter, you're going to have shorter days. Plants, even tropical plants, are going to start to either slow down or just kind of go dormant. So that should help a bit. So anyway, those are just some things that I wanted to mention. I hope that you get a chance to get outside and enjoy the nice weather. As always, if you have any questions or concerns about your yard or garden, feel free to bring those things over to us. Again, you can always text us, call us, email us, Facebook message, whatever. We're everywhere. We're always happy to help. So have a great day in the garden.